It's a real pleasure to have Peter Kennard with us tonight. Peter Kennard is Royal College of Art Professor of Political Arts. His life as an artist and campaigner spans half a century. His most recent book, Visual Descent, outlines 50 years of history through his visual language of photomontage. Seeking to reflect his involvement in the anti-Vietnam War movement, he turned from the medium of painting to photomontage to better address his political views. He's well known for his images he's created for the campaign of Nuclear Disarmament, CND, in the 1970s and 80s, and has continued to work in a wide range of media. And because of the left-wing organisations and publications he used to work with have disappeared, Kennard has turned to using exhibitions, books, and the internet in very interesting and creative ways. Kennard's work is in collections of several major London museums and the Arts Council of England. What I love about Peter's work is this kind of sense of accessibility. It's got a very strong kind of visual language that can be understood by lots of different people without maybe an arts background. Using this kind of sea of images, he kind of pilfers and reappropriates from everyday kind of news articles, archives, and various media. So I think we're just going to get into some of the questions. Your work, has got strong influences from Hannah Hark and John Hartfield. You're bringing and evolving techniques into a new era. I really like the physicality of your work. You can see in the background some of your work with the hands, and this real abrasive aesthetic of the hands ripping through the paper. There's a real sense of materiality, and you've distributed your work in very interesting ways using placards, open source on the internet, posters using the language of protest, and as well as more traditional kind of gallery-based work. I guess in the current climate, with arts institutions struggling, artists kind of questioning larger institutions and sponsors. I'd be really interested to see your point of view. How do you see artists surviving and responding to this kind of new world that we've been kind of thrown into, been forced into, if you like? Yeah.
In terms of COVID-19, I think it's it's obviously happened, and then we had Black Lives Matter, and we've still got that whole thing. So there's a sort of so much going on in the air, and there's so much in terms of the art world that has been, especially with Black Lives Matter, that's been dealing with it in different ways, and especially people working communally and in groups and in collaboration. That in that sense, that's the way to sort of deal with what we're going through. I think is to think about working collaboratively. Also, in terms of income, so many artists, I'm in London, so many artists are finding it so difficult because they couldn't because they get paid bits of cash for whatever they're doing for carpentry and all the things artists do. They couldn't get furloughed, so people are really going through it, and so this does mean that I think we've all got to get together in different ways and find ways to actually relate to each other and forget about the sort of blue chip galleries and that sort of scene, but actually get to the nitty gritty in terms of working.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's interesting what you say about groups. You obviously worked with Extinction Rebellion more recently with your projections on Marble Arch, and I think that's what's interesting about your work. You're not strictly a photographer. I see you more as kind of a campaign and protester, and you're dealing in this kind of political landscape. So your work is through that first and foremost, whereas some artists, I guess, are more kind of gallery based, which is an interesting situation to be in.
Yeah. Well, I've always thought that I should work in as many platforms as possible.
Yes.
So it used to be that I'd work a lot when there was a big I started in the late 60s, so there was a sort of underground media at that time, and newspapers would take montages, and I had a sort and trade unions as well.
Yes.
So there was a whole network which was available to me, as well as putting stuff in galleries. Because I think if you're making political work, I think if it's too removed and only understood by people within the art world because of its very theoretically based,
yes,
it doesn't seem to me to be the way to make that sort of work. Because if we actually believe that art is going to change the world, or encourage people to think about the world, it's got to be something that everyone can relate to in some way. And I don't think that means that you sort of lower the bar. It means that you try and make something as well as you can, but you try and make it in a way that will actually get people thinking critically. I mean, yes. I never believe that. I don't think art doesn't change the world in itself, but it's opening up critical thought in people that is how we're going to change the world, how we get people thinking. So the most recent things, like doing stuff for Extinction Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion actually has got what everyone thinks of various tactics. Yes. It's got people thinking about the environment, and it's got people thinking about global, environmental catastrophe.
Absolutely, I think that's interesting, isn't it? And they've got a very definite kind of visual presence, haven't they? Almost theatrics. The kind of the way they dress and the way they perform in the streets. There's this kind of strange theatrics going on, which kind of beats the mainstream media. And like you said, the outlets are different now, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think working on the street, is really important now. And of course, there's been the whole movement of street art. Yes. That has given people who wouldn't have had any voice at all, visually, has given them a voice. And with Black Lives Matter, there's so much amazing work being done on the street.
Absolutely.
So that's something that wasn't around when I started off, and that's become very prominent now.
Yes,
which is great. So it's always a matter of the sort of people are about what's going on in the world. Half of it is doing the work, the other half is thinking of ways of getting it out. And obviously we've got the internet now, so work can go out on that, which makes a big difference. But I still believe in, you're talking about the materiality. I've always been very concerned with the materiality of the work. So with groups, I'm always saying, don't just advertise your demonstration on the internet, but actually make an A2 poster or an A3 poster and stick it up in the street, because it's got a surprise value in the street, whereas it tends to be people that know about things will go to it on the internet.
Yes. And I think that's right. I think, you're talking about that surprise value. It's almost like receiving a letter. This is a very rare thing that people, there's a tradition of writing a letter. Seeing a placard or seeing something physical does stop you in your tracks, because we're so used to seeing a sea of images on the internet, and we're very passive, and our engagement with it is very passive. So to see something physical, something that's been made and maybe constructed with kind of different techniques is interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's also as the world has become steadily more corporate the whole time, and public spaces become privatized space, and advertising is everywhere. It's even on the steps of escalators in the underground is advert. So working in a very corporate space. So if you see something that is not corporate, that is not selling you some crap, then you're actually it's gonna shock you in some way. It's gonna take you back, and that's really important.
Yeah, it does jar, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. Your techniques you're using are maybe not so slick and polished as some kind of digital photo montage kind of people. I know you do that as well, but it's interesting to see that and like you say, the starkness and this kind of photo montage language. Yeah, no, interesting. Yeah. So, how did you start your journey as a kind of, what was that point you start your journey as kind of a political photo montage artist, and how has that evolved as well? How has that evolved into where you are now, I guess?
Well, I mean, I started off studying painting.
Yes.
When I left school at 16 and studied, managed to get into art college and started by painting. And I'm a Londoner, and I got involved with the anti-Vietnam movement and the marches and the demonstrations, and that's what made me think I wanted to not have that separation between what I was thinking about politically and the work.
Yes.
So that's when I started using photography, because obviously photography is it's got reality within it, however transposed. So it takes you to the event, whereas painting, to me at that time, took me more into the medium than the event.
Yes.
So that's when I sort of started making work combining photographs.
Yes.
And I mean, I still worked putting them onto canvas, but also they existed. I made 5/4 negs of all my imagery, and then was working sort of layering it on top of each other, and putting them into magazines as well, and newspapers, and just having that very as wide an audience as possible.
Yes. Yes.
So and then I started working for. I worked for a newspaper called Workers' Press, and they wanted that's when I started using more specific sort of imagery, which relates much more back to Hartfield, and I was doing like a picture a day sometimes,
Yes.
and that's after I left the Slade, and I really like the idea of the artist, sort of Benjamin's idea of the artist as producer. So I was doing a picture in the morning, and then seeing it going into the newspaper a bit in the evening, and then going off and selling the newspaper, and so I was part of a production process.
Sure.
And the people on the who were printing it, they didn't want to hear all my highfalutin aesthetic theories. They wanted it. They had a space to fill, and I had to fulfill it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's that idea that becoming part of a production process was very important to me. Yes. And it goes back to sort of what the constructivists, the Russian constructivists, and productivist art and those ideas. So that's why I started looking into all those ideas from constructivism and from and Dadaism, like Hannah Hoch and all those people. Because I didn't actually get that education at Slade. And we forget now that when I was at Slade in 67 to 70, those sort of artists weren't even thought about, or even Duchamp. They were very much seen as being little alleyways in this great sort of tradition of art that was sort of invented by Museum Modern Art, mainly in New York. Where you had Picasso, and it leads up to Pollock, and then everything else is with Matisse, and then other things like what Duchamp was doing, or especially someone like Hannah Hoch.
Yes.
Making very political work, and was a woman. They were very much sidelined, and they become more and more central. All those things have become much more central, which is good.
Yes. No, it's an interesting journey, and I think the language you use is really interesting, kind of, and how that's evolved. I guess John Hartfield's work, I guess, kind of evolved from subverting kind of propaganda almost. He's subverting the kind of propaganda posters within the Nazi regime, and using and this kind of propaganda becomes rhetoric, and you're kind of taking on this kind of language and bringing it into 2020, when there's lots of unrest, there's lots of issues to be discussed, I guess. And this seems like the perfect language, this visual language that people understand.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be as well that, which you being young, you probably don't have, but picture libraries were amazing places. You could go there, and they had folders and actual prints, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, which I find great shame. You got Google Images and all that, but everything's become onto the digital realm. Yes. Again, it was a physicality of going to those picture libraries and dealing with it and working. I mean, I spent 20 years standing in a dark room printing stuff and then cutting it together, and which I still do sometimes as well as using the digital. I mean, I don't have any feeling that that one's better than the other, or they're all different ways of working. You know.
Yes, all different tools. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, different tools.
Yeah,
and it's good now because when they came in, when computer digital image making came in, so many art schools thought, oh wow, we can get rid of all this messy dark rooms and all this equipment, and we can have silent rows of students in front of computers. Just, you know, and it's cheap and it's
sure.
And in the last 10 years, you know, the students have demanded much more to get the stuff back.
Yeah.
Like dark rooms and, you know, I mean, I know the people that sell old 35mm stuff, you know, from studios that are being shut down.
Yes.
And they can't get enough of it because all the art schools want to get this stuff back, you know.
I think that's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, because students see it as digital is a tool amongst many other tools. You know, it's one way of working, and there's lots of other ways. So that's
I think that's great, and that's the way I learned. I learned in dark rooms. I've worked in black and white and colour dark rooms, and I kind of like that very quiet, contemplative space being bathed in red light. There's no technology. There's no interference with the world, which I kind of appreciate in a way. And like you say, I think it's interesting from like maybe the business model of institutions was having office spaces with students sitting down, and that was all very neat and tidy. Then there is this resurgence in, you know, alternative process, even like people making daguerreotypes and cyanotypes and darkroom. It's great to see, isn't it? And again, it's a very
I mean, it's a real need, isn't it? Like to actually engage physically with materials, you know. And I mean, there are obviously digital artists, but for most people, it's a matter of needing to engage in the stuff, you know. And then you're controlling the stuff. You're controlling actual materials, which in itself has a subversive feel to it now because we're so digitalized and corporatized, you know.
Yes, absolutely. To have hands on that tacit kind of involvement, you know, and I've seen in your work as well. It'd be great to have a walk around your studio. Actually, you're at your studio now. It'd be great to have a little walk around, maybe discuss what you're working on now.
Yeah. Wait a minute. Let me see if I can. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Wait a minute. So, I'll do a 360-degree. Oh, I can do it turning on a chair.
Even better.
So that's a wall that's got a whole lot of. Is that viewable?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, that's got a whole lot of posters and just stuff that I stick up.
Yes.
In different periods of work.
Yeah.
And then these. At the moment, I'm working on these quite big things on paper, which relate back. Whoa! Probably the rubbish can outside.
Okay.
Which relates to work I did some years ago, but I've just been trying to think of something that talks about 2020, and I've been making quite specific things and working on a little book. But then I thought something much more existential and physically engaging. So I'm using lots of paint and charcoal, and these hands on, which are, and they've got just share prices behind. So it gives that conflict between, you know, the poverty that's being created and I mean, I can't explain them. They just are.
Sure.
So that's what I'm working on at the moment.
Okay, interesting.
That's the window.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, yeah, I can see it.
And then I've got I've been working on putting my stuff into an archive.
Oh,
Been
okay.
working on for a few
Yes.
years. So when you have a montage that I've done,
Yes.
you know, in a sort of catalogue, you can then go to the box, and there are all the repros of that in newspapers, and because
Hmm.
I see the newspapers and the magazines and posters as
Yes.
being as important as the original, you know,
Absolutely.
which
Yes.
are
Yes.
in another space.
Hmm.
So I've been putting that together,
Wow.
and it's
Quite
interesting that
remarkable.
archives now are often seen as work that was just put in archives is now seen as being actual work. You know, I
Yes.
know
Yeah.
that
Yes. Yes.
The Tate archive, a lot of work that was put into the archive has now been taken out of the archive and been put out as work. You
As
know,
a
it's been,
yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. And you've
you know,
done this long process with the Tate, and you've done the Imperial War Museum where you exhibited your archive,
yeah,
which is very, like you
yeah,
said, is very interesting. It takes on a new status as the actual work.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
all,
absolutely. I mean, I like showing. Um, what have we got here? Just books and things.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and general chaos.
Of course.
See,
Every artist studio has the general chaos.
but yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I show work, I often show originals and then have sort of vitrines with, or just up on the wall. Up on the wall, have posters and newspapers and book covers and badges and T-shirts. And,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
so all that work, but all that material becomes part of the work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Do you keep the fragments? So you're doing the photo montage. Do you keep the kind of fragments you end up with? So it's quite interesting when you start to cut and splice into image, you end up with a outline or a sliver of something. Do you keep those fragments or do you discard them?
Yeah, no, I do keep stuff going
Yeah,
right back. And
yeah.
originally I photographed everything, just tons, thousands of images
Oh wow.
from newspapers and things onto 35 mil. So I've got,
Yes.
that was like sort of visual dictionary of material.
Yes. Yeah.
So I've still got that. But and then I sort of reuse old images and cut them up again. And it's like it's a matter of thinking, start thinking visually.
Yes. Yeah.
It's, you know, which is why I call it sort of visual dictionary.
Yes.
Yeah. So often when I was doing those sort of montages, I didn't have an idea always. I just went through images, and then the idea came through the image
Yes.
that related to a subject. You know, so
Yes.
it's not like I have an idea and then create the montage. It's often an interrelation between the two.
So it's that process of creating and making the ideas start to form and become a body of work.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, through the image, you know.
Yeah.
Which I always try and, when I'm working with students, you know, I try and say, well, you know, find sort of, whether they're doing montage or not, but find images and things that they're interested in, and then work with those images and transpose them or whatever they want to do.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I think that's what's interesting.
So the subject doesn't override it in that sense. The same as the material.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always difficult, isn't it? Yeah, the kind of starting a new body of work, and you've done this quite a lot, where you've kind of conceptualized the work with numbers, and that seems to be a reoccurring thing with some of your work, where you've used those numbers of you know, maybe it's death tolls or world poverty or the stock exchange numbers, and there's this kind of confluence, I guess, through the numbers, and that becomes the basis almost, which is a nice way of working, which is an interesting way of working.
I mean, I did an installation doing that at the Imperial War Museum.
Yes.
And one of the reasons was that, you know, they get thousands of kids going to the Imperial War Museum. And I wanted to find some way to engage the kids, you know, think about the sort of realities of the world. So I used these numbers, and then on a sort of balcony, on a sort of banister in front, I printed what the numbers referred to.
Yes.
You know, the number of nuclear weapons in the world, the number of deaths in
Yes.
in developing countries
Mm.
through hunger, and to make those sort of analogies,
Yes.
And it was great because, I mean, in terms of audience, tons of groups and school groups and
Okay.
came in and used it in that way, and used it as a discussion point for
Yes.
their
Yes.
ideas. And then when I was there, I also did a big workshops. They let me use an enormous space at the top of the building when we had these half-term workshops. But sometimes you had 150
Oh wow.
kids all making work. I don't think they'd ever do anything like that again. It was pretty close. But we just provided a few photographs and photocopied them and gave them out.
Yes.
And tons of materials, art materials. And it's incredible what people, young people would think of. They've been through the museum,
Yes.
and then they'd seen my stuff, and then they came in there, so they'd got an idea of, a critique in their heads really of
Yes.
what they'd
Yes.
and made work. And a lot of the young ones, a lot of their parents were quite amazed at what they were doing, what they knew.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
With the internet, they know a lot of what's going on. Yeah.
I think that's great. Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's great to kind of engage young people, and I think it's you just said you were quite interested in this idea of live history. So making sure young people are well equipped with the kind of discussions of today, and and what a great way to do it with photo montage, something very hands-on, and like you say, people, I think young people are very aware. I think they do know a lot, and it's a good way to articulate it, maybe.
And also, that's why I've done my latest book, Visual Descent.
Yes.
Instead of doing a sort of, then I did that, I've done it as 50 years of events, political events. So it starts off with the Vietnam War and ends up on Extinction Rebellion. And I had things like, the miners' strike, which kids, people don't know about, and other things disappear so quickly now from consciousness.
Yes, yes.
So I've explained the event and then talked about the work I did and showed it in newspapers and things. So it's meant to be like a history book, really.
Yes,
but
yes.
Told through imagery.
Yeah, no, fantastic.
Yeah.
And that's a great way. I think 'cause a lot of people are visual learners, and I think we're a very visually articulate kind of world now, with the advent of the internet, and maybe through advertising campaigns we are aware of these visual clues and language, and we can start to decode them. Things that are very, I guess, difficult to say in writing unless you're a very good writer.
People are more articulate visually than they know.
Yes.
It's just people don't often get. I mean, I've done a lot of workshops, especially with Cat Phillips, who I've worked with.
Yes.
And we've done workshops all over the place, and sometimes, especially kids, they come in and say, "Oh, it's boring," and then by the end of the day, they don't want to leave because they realise they can use art to explore their own lives.
Yes, yes.
It's something out there. Often at school, it's very removed from them the way they do it. But once they realise that they can use all different materials, we always provide lots of materials.
Yes.
They get very excited because they explain themselves through words and image.
Yes,
often.
yes. Yeah.
So that sort of workshop, and that's of course happening all over the world now. Different sorts of workshops are going on that involving artists and people come along and want to make work.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's a great thing, isn't it? I think that's a great tool to have, and it's a great thing to equip young people with, really, to kind of explain the complexities of the world now, which is much needed. I would say. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what do you think's next for your work? How do you see it kind of evolving? And is there any?
Is there anything? Well, as I say, I'm working on these.
Yes.
These things. So at the moment, that's what I'm doing, and I am working on another book, but I've always wanted to make. I mean, I've made quite a few books, and they're all experimental in the sense they take different forms. and always at the back of it is I don't know if you know a Marshall McLuhan book called "Medium is the Massage."
Yes.
Which is like image and text,
Yes,
and that's
yes.
always. So I always started off with that in mind, and then veered off into something else. So I'm starting off there again, trying to take some of the phrases, like that have been happening, like unskilled workers have become the way they became key workers.
Yes, yeah.
Since the COVID-19,
Yes, yeah.
people talked about them as unskilled, and then they became key. Now they seem to be going back to unskilled because they won't put the wages up of, the government won't put the wages up of nurses and medical workers. So it's that sort of the way language is lying language, basically, from governments. Is
absolutely, yeah, sure.
And trying to do something with that and images.
Yes, and it's very interesting. I guess it becomes more complex with the advent of the internet and fake news and this idea of misremembering things. That's what I'm concerned about with all this kind of political chaos. Is people kind of believe so much in the idea or what they're told, they misremember the facts. Like you're probably familiar with this idea of the Mandela effect. When Mandela was, everybody thought he died in prison, and in the 90s, and in fact then it became, the prime minister, and but people this was so ingrained into this kind of consciousness of the masses, and people believed it, and this is kind of happening now, I guess, with social media. I think there's so many different kind of divisive things going on with kind of mainstream media. It's so biased in a way.
Absolutely. And also, like you think of, I mean, it's all very obvious with Trump, but you think of Boris Johnson, and he's talking about it as a triumph.
Yes.
Their response to their virus. I mean, it's this idea that if he says it enough times, I mean, that's what they did, originally to get Brexit going, and now the latest one is build, build, build. You have these mindless phrases that if you go on, I think it's Dominic Cummings' idea. If you shout them out enough, people will, and they'll forget the actual. It's fake, it is a form of fake news.
Yes.
And people will forget the actual facts. I mean, how you can say that the government's response has been a triumph when it's actually been an absolute disaster.
Absolutely,
and caused thousands of deaths. It's that sort of thing that but they're very canny like that.
Yes. Like you say, it's that these mindless mantras, isn't it, that are going on, and we know repetition is a great way of teaching people. It's a great way to positively reinforce something, and they seem to do that in a very negative way, in a very unjust and untrue way, which is it's kind of dangerous. It's very dangerous, isn't it? It's very dangerous what's happening at the moment with
it is. It is very dangerous. And especially as we've got Trump, who might get re-elected, God forbid. But
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
and he's just out of it. Very difficult to satirize him in a sense. I think
it's bizarre, isn't it? Yeah, it's very bizarre, isn't it? With his like kind of Twitter addiction and the way he communicates is even very bizarre, isn't it? It's a very
absolutely.
Interesting. No, fantastic. Yeah, okay. We've covered a lot of points here. It's been great to see your studio and see your work and kind of discuss your work in practice as well. So that's been a real honour to get that insight into what you're doing, and I look forward to seeing your latest work develop and see your new books and
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay. Any final points you want to leave people on, or you?
No, well, I just think it's really important that everyone who can uses some sort of visual forms to explore your own ideas. It's something that, I mean, so many people I've worked in workshops, they say, oh, I haven't done any art since I was in my third form at school, And then when they do it, they find it such a great way to explore what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and that is a totally political thing. Doing, because it goes against all the shit that's bombarding us all the time. And one can make one's place. So I think it's really important that people actually do make work in that way.
Yes, that's fantastic. Yeah, and a great point to end on, really. Unpack, be creative, and have a voice, I guess, isn't it? That's the most important thing.